Buen día, muchas gracias a los que están presentes y a los que están viendo esto después grabado en el canal YouTube. Es un gusto para mí presentar al doctor Dirk Brooks, la X no se pronuncia, pero Dirk Brooks, al que hemos conocido con varios de los miembros del IFEO hace mucho tiempo a través de lecturas de sus trabajos, y hace poco tuvimos el gusto de encontrarnos en una reunión y de ahí surgió esta invitación a la Argentina. Los trabajos por los que conocemos a Dirk vienen de la interfaz entre la ciencia y el manejo, el uso de la información científica para el manejo de áreas naturales y de otro tipo de ecosistemas, y lo que siempre nos impresionó de él es que hace eso en la vida diaria y escribe muy bien sobre eso. Esa combinación es rara. Y trabaja en lo que los ecólogos más grandes conocemos como manejo adaptativo, que es la idea de ver las propuestas de manejo de un área en particular como
met in South Africa that has studied at this university. I'll give you some tips and see if you can. He's a bit older than me, but he was a famous person in his day, and maybe he still is. I think he studied architecture, but he never became an architect. He was good at soccer, but then, like Argentinians are. We're not so good at soccer, so we just, at the World Cup, we just cheer for the Argentinians. And, but then he played rugby. And in the 1980s and 90s, he was thought of as the best flyer in the world. Does it ring a bell? Maybe a bit too old for this generation.
Maybe your YouTube audience will answer later.
Hugo Porta.
Ah, yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
You met him.
So he was the ambassador for Argentina to South Africa and Victoria, and I played in the 1990s in the indoor soccer league, and then we played against the Portuguese embassy, and I saw, I know this face, and it was Hugo Porta. He played for them. They were way too good for us. So but anyway, so reflections on my own journey. I work for the National Parks Agency, but I'm also involved with our Nelson Mandela University, and it's common for us scientists in the Conservation Agency to also have a formal affiliation with at least one of the universities in South Africa. And here is like in journalism, the opening paragraph that gives you the whole story. I started at university with limnology in the natural sciences, and I worked on algae and did simple experiments on how they behave when exposed to different conditions, where you reduce the variables. That is what we call reductionist science, how science progress by looking at cause and effect so that we can build on the knowledge base. It's fairly simple. You can do the experiments in the lab, publish a paper, and you can move on. Then I got involved with trying to understand whether rivers are healthy or not, but looking at response indicators, how different communities in the rivers respond to what all the integrated things in the catchment, what happens to them. So that would be disciplinary science, and when you have different people looking at different communities and the riparian vegetation, that would be multidisciplinary science, everyone looking at his own discipline. When we integrate the results from all of that to find out if the river is in a natural condition, or it's slightly impaired, or it's severely impaired, I guess that is integrated or interdisciplinary science. You do a level of integration to come up with an answer that you cannot get with only one of the disciplines. And then later in my life, I became interested in landscapes, with people and nature, social ecological landscapes. And my own research moved on to transdisciplinary research to not only understand the system, but also learn with the system, and with some idea of what the system should, how the system should respond to what's happening in the world to become a better place. So that is the summary story, but now we'll get into the detail. So my own country, and these dark dots are the national parks, 20 of them in South Africa. Those are my outdoor laboratories. We scientists get to work in all the parks, even though I'm based in the south. And the park of the land area of South Africa. And they range quite a lot. So up there you've got the oldest and the largest, that's Kruger National Park. Most people know about Kruger. And your typical experience is if you sit in a vehicle and you look at nature from the safety of your vehicle. It's a fenced park with gated access. And it's quite different to the Garden National Park. You see it's a very fragmented park. It's got no fences. People can enjoy nature outside, and there are hikers on the 5-day Potter hiking trail. And they've got to cross that river, and you see the overnight huts on the other side. So there's another way of experiencing nature. And here's another form. This is a city park, Table Mountain National Park. Table Mountain in the background there with the city of Cape Town all around it. So there are millions of people visiting the park every year, and thousands every day to take their dogs for a walk or go mountain biking or surfing, and so sometimes they don't even know they're in the park. So you see different kinds of parks, completely different types of experiences as well. A little bit more about our parks. This is looking at a period from 2003 to 2013, so that's quite a while ago, about 10 years, and all the research papers that we could find that address issues in one of the parks. So these are the parks by papers. You see Kruger National Park, the oldest and the biggest, draws the most research. Quite a lot of research over that 10-year period. In Kruger, Garden Route, where I live, Table Mountain, the three that I mentioned are the top ones, and then it filters down to some of the parks that get very little research. But what I want to get at is, what is that research about? The majority is on animals. And so 50% of the papers in that 10-year period address animals. And 80% of that 50% is lions, rhino, and elephant. So that's what people really like to go and research on. Ecological processes and plants. So up here it's biodiversity. And then you get into management issues, social issues. Look where climate is, all the way down there. But that was a while ago. And then shortly after that, we did one of these horizon scans with managers where you see what is coming over the horizon, what should we be doing research on to help us with information. And what came out was global environmental change, including climate change, but also these other drivers, plastic and disease and all the things that are happening in the world, social expectations, protected area effectiveness, ecosystem, and here's the biodiversity issues. And then a lot of social issues further on as well. So a little bit of a disjunct at that time in terms of what gets produced by research and what the needs are. It's not that we've got to stop to do the animal and the plant and ecological processes, but also add some of the other things. And I'm not showing that now, but since we became aware of this, it has definitely, the profile has changed a lot. And now this is down in the first 3 years to about 50%, and much more climate change and social benefits and ecosystem services work gets done in the parks. And this is, I didn't realize, but it came out quite poorly, but just an indication from the global World Economic Forum. So this is the economists, not even the scientists or the conservationists, but the economists says, what are the problems over the next 2 years and over the next 10 years? The serious issues. The green ones are environmental. The red ones are social. So natural disasters, I see this not very, this is natural disasters and extreme weather conditions and a number of other environmental ones. But look at 10 years from now. The economists think that it'll be all environmental problems, the social and the natural sciences. But that's not new, that's what we realize. If you do study these problems, you've got to kind of contextualize the problem in a particular history and situation. So they are sometimes place-based research, and they require a little bit of an action orientation. So for scientists, that's also a tricky thing, because you used to distance yourself from the outcomes, just do the science. But now there's also almost an expectation that you'll be part of the solution. And co-learning and knowledge exchange orientation, so it's learning with the people that has 2 is the socially engaged, practical type of research, action research, integrated and implementation sciences. Each of these has got a little literature on their own. Sustainability science. I'm going to focus on one of these new sciences, and that is transdisciplinary research, but there are big overlaps between them. This is not what I want to do, but I'm just to show you that if you're into philosophy of science, then there's a lot of fascinating literature that you can get into. And at the end, my last slide is a list of only 8 papers that if you're interested in this, that you might find very, very interesting. Gibbons is mode 1, theoretical, and mode 2, practical. Manfred Max Neer's classic paper, 2005, talk about weak transdisciplinarity and strong transdisciplinarity. A different manner of seeing the world, more systemically connected and holistically in your research. And Nicolescu, the French philosopher, quantum physicist, I think, he's also tried to talk about different types of transdisciplinarities, but that's just for if you're interested, you can do that. But what I want to say here is, so people are still looking at how to classify, where does this fit into the university? Is it a discipline? And some people nowadays say, maybe it's a way of being. And I've worked with, I've examined some PhD theses of people that have followed the transdisciplinary approach, and I've supervised a few students that have gone that route. And it's so interesting. I tend to think that it's a way of being. It's a young generation, and not all of them are young, but that actually want to engage in the world in a different way. And for me, that is a nice picture. It's sort of dancing around and looking for where the light is shining or something like that, like finding your way. And it's also, you don't, it's very rare to go to university and get taught into how to, what are the methods for transdisciplinary research. You've got to kind of find your way, and then you go to your study, the social ecological system, and find your way there as well. So it's a bit of a journey of discovery. And then by halfway through the first year, they complained because all these people who are doing the biophysical science and conservation, they've got it so easy because they can just map out their experimental plots and do the experiments and get the results and so on. But it's a bit of a different way of engaging with research. A definition, there are many definitions, but let's maybe look at features of transdisciplinary work. And this is one that I quite like, is that it's typically, one of the key things is that transdisciplinary work involves people from outside of academia in the learning journey. But it's coordinated and facilitated by researchers from universities, most typically, through joint problem solving. Meadows famously said that he who formulates the problem gets to define the solution or something like that. So it's, whether scientists formulate the problem or managers or the public, it's a kind of a different formulation. So here you want to formulate the problem together right from the start. It's difficult when you do a PhD because you tend to go, the university process, you've got to write your proposal and get approval and so on. So how do you formulate the problem with your stakeholders? So that's one of the tricky questions, is that they're truly transdisciplinary. Then knowledge co-production, once you've got the problem, and then joint application of the solutions. So that's stretching for students, but some of them have actually managed that. And another way of seeing it is that's the Australian National University identifying and bringing together a range of relevant perspectives from society and academia, from disciplines and key groups in society, to develop a more comprehensive understanding of a multifaceted issue, and then to determine the best way forward as well as the most appropriate and effective implementation strategy. So that's beyond the classic scope of Sweden and various places that these younger generation people write about their experiences in transdisciplinary research. And I find it quite inspiring. So actually I've said this already, the multidisciplinary without integration, interdisciplinary with integration, and the transdisciplinary also involving people from outside of academia. Another nice way of looking at it is Maria Tengo's knowledge weaving, bringing many different strands of knowledge together. Local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, practical knowledge, and yet the transdisciplinary social science, natural science, and looks like technical, and get an enriched picture through co-production and integration work. That's part of the challenge. The Australian National University, the first calls were from the 1970s, so it's already been around for a number of decades, but few universities teach a course in transdisciplinary research. Very recently, this year in fact, the Australian National University, a leading one of the top 3 universities in Australia and a top 50 university in the world, published a paper with a bold statement that they want to give every one of their 13,000 undergraduate students skills in transdisciplinary research. That is their aim. So by the time they graduate, they must be equipped with the basic understanding of the 6 characteristics, I'll show you that now, of the ANU transdisciplinary framework, exposed to transdisciplinary problem solving, getting the opportunity to work alongside students from other schools and faculties, and giving the opportunity to address a societal problem in the area of concern. This is so ambitious, but they're going that route. And Lorraine, we have to know Lorraine van Kerkhoff, she was part of the little team that they put together to come up with this plan. And this is the framework of transdisciplinarity. We don't have to go into deep, but the integrative, change-oriented, improved action. It's not for, so transdisciplinary work is not for simple cause and effect, is obvious and can be determined problems. It is for those complex and wicked problems. There's not one right answer, so yes. And pluralistic, many voices, context-based, so there is a history and a local context often that you've got to keep in mind. And then some critics would say, but is that information, is that now research that can be applied elsewhere? Is that uniformly available to places around the world? And often it is a bit specific to the context, but there are generic principles that can be applied, and that's how we learn in transdisciplinary work, is place by place by place. We put a picture together of how the world is evolving in its social ecological systems. And at this point, this is just to have a quick pause and say, are you with me? So this is kind of the background. Now I'm going to go into my journey. And if you want to ask a question, please.
Is there an obligate relationship between transdisciplinarity and going out of science and dealing with stakeholders? Is it possible to have a transdisciplinarity just among scientists of different disciplines?
Yes. So some of those classifications that I've shown, the theoretical argues that can be transdisciplinary as well. So that is just still inside of academia, but then across several disciplines, and it addresses a practical, perhaps it's more applied. Yes. So there are arguments for that, and most of the recent work that I've seen says, but yes, that is maybe that's what we've seen as interdisciplinary and not necessarily trans. The trans being just in between, that's not necessarily fitting in the academic disciplines, I guess. So there are proponents for both sides, and I'm not making a call on that necessarily. It's fine. I think we understand that for many of the contemporary problems, you need to work with people from across many boundaries, and whether it's in in the faculties, in the schools, and the disciplines, or also in society, just start to reach the boundary somewhere.
Yes, but for example, some aspects of global change may be problems that don't necessarily require to deal with stakeholders. It's just a scientific problem that needs to be addressed. So you're making two steps, like the going through different disciplines, but also getting outside of science and deal with reality.
And yes, I think that's a good point, and I think that is also a scale issue. So at a very local scale, you typically involve the stakeholders, but a global problem like that, I think there is a primary science responsibility too.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, don't have a necessary. I'm not the authority in terms of the answer, but it's a very good question. Yeah. Shall we go on? Yes. Okay, go on. And we're doing fine all the time. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about a number of studies that I've been involved in and how I make sense of to do transdisciplinary work. And I see it as a form of social learning. So you learn with people with slightly other identities in terms of what they've been exposed to, whether it's their disciplinary training or their experience, and so on. So you develop common understanding with other people. And it's interesting when you sometimes do that, you've got to almost put aside your own beliefs because now you start to see the world in slightly different ways, and which is hard. It's quite hard for scientists as well, it was for me, at least though, because you get now exposure to, you've got to listen to many other voices. Who do you learn with? Actors from the domains of science, and I'm going to just do the local thing where I also involve the people outside of science, actors from the domains of science, management, planning, policy, depending on the particular problem that you are addressing. So then you'll identify those that are relevant, that we'll get to that. What are you learning about? A complex social ecological issue directed by desired sustainability outcome. And how? Actors are interactively involved from the problem framing all the way through to implementation or application. So there's a lot of interaction during the course of the study. And why? To achieve a new and shared understanding, collective cognition towards improved behavior. I guess sort of a summary of the social learning process. And the case studies that I'm going to draw on, I'm not going to go into those into too much detail, except maybe the first one, number of studies. The first one says a 5-year national scale project in South Africa. It was actually more than 5 years because it started even 5 years before this 5 years. And it started when now a good colleague, but then we only knew each other's names, approached me. She's a conservation biologist. This is typically how these things happen. She's a conservation biologist, and I had to World Bank project. They had to do a systematic conservation plan to enlarge our Addo Elephant National Park from a very small park to a very large park. And usually in that discipline, they've just used terrestrial land-based features of biodiversity. And she said, now for the first time, we want to include aquatic features as well. And years later, she said, I was her second choice. The first choice person wasn't available, so she called me. But it was a very good combination, and we've done so much work since then. It was back in 2002. So aquatic ecology, conservation biology, bringing two disciplines together, we came up with something that was novel. And we discovered there was a group in the US, WWF, United States, also trying the same work, so we got together with them, together we published the paper. Then we went back to South Africa and said, there's potential in this paper, but we need to get into the policy processes. We started to work with planners and policy people, develop a cross-sector policy objectives, agriculture, water, conservation, all involved, and then only we started with this project to identify priority areas in the country of which rivers and which wetlands should be conserved to achieve a target of 20% of all the rivers in can see a long, interesting journey of getting there. So I'll just refer to this as the NFEPA project, National Freshwater Ecosystem Priority Areas. Here we work with farmers. So this is where I live, down in the Guard route. We've got mountains in the back, lovely plateau with lakes. These lakes are a Ramsar site, international importance in terms of wetland conservation. In the ocean here, and right behind the lakes is a plateau where you've got all the meadows for the dairy farmers, and the water drains down to the lakes. So this project was about talking about ecological infrastructure and wise management, and over a period of 3 years. And then every year we get together with stakeholders to revise the vision for a particular protected area that becomes the framework for how we manage that national park. So that is also for us a co-production process. So these are some of the examples that I'm going to draw on. And now, if you're a researcher and you're interested in transdisciplinary research, the question is, how can I prepare myself to participate in or facilitate transdisciplinary research? And my recipe is that you've got to work out who to learn with, what to learn about, and how to learn. And that's how and for each of those, I'm just going to cover 2 or 3 aspects. So first one is who to learn with. And this looks a bit daunting, but this is actually was in the early years incredibly useful for us, and that's from that Manfred Max-Neef paper. And he calls this the hierarchy of transdisciplinarity. And it's actually quite simple once you get into it. Here at the bottom is the empirical disciplines that you typically find in a university, which is about the knowledge that exists. It sits in the maths and the physics and the chemistry departments, and they've got their own specialized language so that they can be productive in producing their knowledge, and it's a beautiful thing, and that is very important. There's also a pragmatic level, and that is what we are capable of doing with that knowledge in architecture, agriculture, engineering, and so forth, forestry. And then there's another level, that's the normative level, what we want to do, planning, design, policy, and law. And another level, the purposive level, how to do what we want to do with values and ethics and philosophy comes in. And his argument is that these vertical connections determine the degree of transdisciplinarity that we practice. So, quite a theoretical framework, but we actually used it, and it was quite good. For that NFEPA project, we said, so right, so we've got to figure out which ones of the empirical disciplines we need to solve our question. So we framed the question with stakeholders, and then we had, and in the process we started to build a team. Who will be the larger team that will learn together? And we needed aquatic ecologists, hydrology, and so forth. And so we said actually we would quite like economics and genetics as well, but those we didn't quite get because sometimes you just don't have the resources or they're not available in your time frame. So these in the grey boxes were very core to the project over its 5-year duration. This is the pragmatic level. So this is government departments that work for water, environment, biodiversity, and agriculture. We got a bit of agriculture, but not enough. So the connections here indicate where we had strong links. This became the core project team, people from in those boxes. But then we also had very good connections here with this normative level, conservation planning, water resource planning, land use planning, and national legislation. We dealt with a little bit with some of the policies and so on. But so that was how we started to map a bit broader than a classic project team, but the people that we want to actively involved in the co-learning process, and I think that was part of the success. So the first one is learning with people from across the transdisciplinary hierarchy. The second one is to also think of the soft voices. Here I had a master's student, and we worked on those wilderness lakes with the farmers, and I said, so find out who all the stakeholders are, and this student just went overboard about it, and she came up with this list of collective identities of potential stakeholders, actual groups. We'll see it. So for me was that she uncovered here a group that we call, it was women. And we call them the livelihood fishers, because that's what they did. They would spend a lot of time at the lakes just fishing, and it's for the protein, it's for the fish, but it's also a lifestyle, it's also an identity thing, and it's also a socializing thing. That's what they do. But they were completely silent, and the other stakeholders didn't know about it. And so bringing those soft voices into the conversation, into the dialogues. Initially they were very quiet, and then they discovered their voice. And it was a complete eye-opener for some of the other stakeholders to say there's also a legitimate use of the lakes, and we're all part of living in this neighborhood of the lakes. So great to find to give power to the quiet voices. And then even in your own project team, nice to have experts, because that's credibility. People with a good standing in science. Many of the stakeholders do respect that very much. Nice to have young people, I've just called it novices, because their minds are still open, so they're not so entrained in what they already believe and what has worked for them, so they sometimes can challenge and come up with completely new ideas. And essential to have bridging agents, those that are just naturally good with having these connections with other disciplines and with people in government and in policy. And if you do transdisciplinary work, that's an invaluable skill. Those connectors or networkers that provide the bridges. And that has sometimes the credibility to ask a very senior person in government, the Deputy Director General also, to say, would you please chair this meeting for us? Because we're having these high-level people and we need somebody like you to make them come to the meeting and to contribute to the cause. So yes, that has helped for us. That is, who do we learn with? Now, what do we learn about? The photos are just a way of sharing a little bit about what our parks look like and what you can find there. What do we learn about in transdisciplinarity? And so we sometimes think this is a climate change issue, we've got to learn about climate change. For me, it always starts with to learn about each other. For the other stakeholders to learn about these livelihood fishers, and the fishers to learn about them. Our stakeholders to learn about sand parks and us about them. And this is something that sometimes we forget and so valuable. So we use a number of tricks to get that learning going. And there's a historical timeline, so the stakeholders build this timeline, and then they realize that we all share something here in our histories. We've all lived through the fire of 2017 or so, and yes, and then there was this event or that, and the flood, and so on. So, but there are also differences. So there was just one technique of learning about each other, and we saw how so much trust and relationships started to develop. That social capital in your social ecological system. In my case, it's the garden route, that whole area between the sea and the mountain, which is a good thing going forward to face all the changes that are coming our way. Another what to learn about is to learn about an aspirational common future, something that's achievable, that we can hold together, and that becomes the commonality that we strive for, even if we have lots of differences. But if you do this sound process, we've always been able to come up with a future that you can articulate, write down, that most stakeholders, just about all stakeholders, can buy into and say, yes, that's one thing we agree on. That's a good place to start. These are some of the actual stakeholder meetings, and we've got a process where we link the vision with objectives. So the vision are those narrative statements of social intent. Those are like soft statements, but then you link it down all the way to practical and scientifically rigorous endpoints that we can measure and that we can report against. And that together becomes what we call a desired state, what we desire together to move towards. This is for one of the parks. It's that objectives hierarchy. This is what it looks like in practice, but this is just the vision and the first layer of objectives, and each one of these breaks down into another layer and another layer until you get to the indicators or the goals right at the end. But this is done by and with the stakeholders, and we try to stay true to what comes out of those meetings, and we've never been disappointed. It's not as if you say, but we're going to lose control. National Conservation Agency, we're going to lose control. We ask the stakeholders what we want this park to look like. I've never been in a situation where it's gone wrong. It's quite interesting if you trust people, if you just give them part of the responsibility to say, this park in your landscape, let's come up with something that's sensible for the future. This is what we came up with stakeholders. I actually want to move a little bit faster because I want to get to the end and not run out of time. So yes, we also learn about, don't be scared to use your academic concepts. People love that if you explain it well. One of the wilderness meetings we've used things like Anthropocene, tragedy of the commons. A few weeks later, one of the farmers saw me in town and he said, the concept that you explained, the tragedy of the commons, I now understand much better, so I've been able to use that concept. So we think it's sometimes too technical and so on, but we have fantastic concepts in science that we can also share with stakeholders. How to learn? From a position of modesty. As scientists, we think we've got the answers sometimes. But these are for complex issues that there's not one right answer often. So acknowledge that you also only have partial understanding. That's an important place to be, and learn to listen with empathy, to put yourself into these people's, the livelihood fishers, put yourself in their position and truly try to understand. We really I believe in face-to-face learning. To have setups, we often create social learning spaces, so little tables with coffee and something to eat so that people feel like they're in a coffee shop. And it just opens up the learning potential a little bit. And until there's, over time, develop trust, and then people can start to share their uncertainties. Patient persistence, transdisciplinary learning can be slow because you've got to take the pace of the slowest person in the room. And science is efficient and fast, so that can be a frustration. Respect for stakeholders is a nice story is in that wilderness farmers, the dairy farmers example, the funder said, you must have your first stakeholder workshop now, and I learned from one of the fellow academic professor at university. He said, no, the stakeholders are not ready. So he just said, no, sorry, we're running a stakeholder process here, not it's not a engineering mechanistic thing. And he said, we will wait for the stakeholders to invite us. That was completely new to me, a foreign idea. So we approached the farmers and said, when do you meet? And they said, once a week, early in the morning, before we start to milk, and that is like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So can we attend your meetings just to observe, So somebody would go there, have coffee with them, and just listen. And after a few weeks, they said, so why are you here? And we tell them. Then you have an opportunity to tell them about your project. And after another few weeks, they said, can we come maybe to one of your meetings? And then that professor said, the farmers are now ready. So now we can have our that's respect for your stakeholders, So fantastic. And we had a wonderful meeting with them. Through knowledge co-production, there's a whole science on that. There's an explosion in the literature on co-production processes. And so that is when you develop a product and no one knows, everyone thinks it's their product, So it's great when you, maybe as the facilitator, has initiated the process, but they believe it's their product. They've done the work, so that then it's co-production. Everyone was part of coming up with that. Those in FEPA maps, the freshwater priority areas, that worked like that. People from so many, I'm going to actually, there are the maps. So many people participated in that. So we also call the maps a boundary object. So people people from different identities can relate to the map. They come, if you put a map on the table, it's a magic thing that people come and stand around the map and they say, yes, there's an area where I saw that fish, and this is, so they can come with their knowledge and their expertise and their context, and they can use the map to communicate with each other. And here we say something like the collective knowledge and experience of 1,000-person years that we got to contribute to these maps, that eventually the whole of South Africa is now covered with that kind of map, and the maps were co-produced with people with field experience and scientists who've done the monitoring and so on for many years. So that was a knowledge co-production process. And here's a concept that I absolutely love. And I read this book, Ray Oldenburg, it's an American, The Great Good Place, and he says there are 3 places. Traditionally, home is the first place, work is the second place, and then community, third place. And he says in America, in the suburban culture, we've lost the third place. You go from home, your first place, to work, and back in the evening. Because you live in the suburb and you go to the city, and you've lost. And the third place is the pub in Ireland, tea garden in Japan, and the beer garden in Germany, and maybe the barber shop or the church, or where the main conversation is coffee shops, bookstores, bars, where the main activity is conversation, and people can just share. And a similar term that comes from the old Greek philosophers is the agora, the marketplace in Greece, where people would come together and listen to the philosophers and have conversations. Places where you can have conversations. So we started to think of designing third places where people from natural science and social science and public can come and debate these issues, whether it's ecological infrastructure or river conservation and so on. So we try to, I think there are some pictures, try to design third places, and it can be a site visit. You have a mouth opening of an estuary, mechanical opening, and then once you are there at the site, it's a different experience to when you tell people like in a classroom. Here's an old school hall that we revamped early in the morning to make it look a little bit like a coffee shop, and to have a sustainability dialogue there with people with different backgrounds. There were also dairy farmers and so on. So these social learning spaces or third places, I think, has worked very well for us as a social learning setting. And here is one that I wondered about. There's nothing like that in the book, but one of my colleagues organized this very innovative walking down the length of a river. And this is the Knysna River, and the river that provides the seaside village of Knysna with water. But it's a water scarce environment, and there are a number of farmers along the river, and she organized this 3-day hike from the mountains all along the river course to the point where the water is abstracted, so that people can see water doesn't come from the tap, it comes from the mountain, and what happens to the river. So it was tricky terrain, and there were big pools that you swim through and so on, but with the farmers. And so what an amazing learning journey when you are captured there, everyone's attention, for 3 days, and sleeping in the evening on the bank of this little stream, mountain stream. But then as you go past the farming and the eroded river banks where there are lots of dairy cows, and you see the change in the color of the water and so on, then they start to talk and they just see it in a completely new way.
So who are the participants here?
So there were places that were pretty inaccessible almost, so there were also people from mountain rescue and farmers, okay, and municipality, and a bunch of scientists. So it was having conversation, and that's the third place. It's just having conversation in a nice neutral setting. And that's my summary of the heuristics for promoting transdisciplinary work. There's who to learn with, what to learn about, how to learn, and there's the paper on that. Last 2 slides is for researchers or students that want to go in this direction, that may consider this and have realistic expectations, because norms change, behavior change slowly, you will not necessarily achieve success in 2 years or 3 years. The wilderness project was a bit embarrassing in the end because it lasted for 3 years and then there wasn't any follow-up money and we had to abandon the project, and the stakeholders said, now we've done all the effort and created the trust. And then they said, so when are you coming again? And the researchers has gone on. So I'm an embedded researcher, so I work for an agency, so I don't always need external funding and I can go on. But often for academic researchers, that is the problem. So you need longer term. Sometimes it's a lifelong journey with your particular area. Scientific rigor and societal relevance is hard to balance the two. You can do that. I've seen the tension with PhD students. They become feeling very responsible towards their stakeholders. My stakeholders need me, I've got to be respectful to them, but the university want these papers, so it becomes a hard thing to manage in terms of your own energy and time. I've seen students, PhD students going that route, almost always flirting with burnout. May have to sacrifice a few papers with achieving up. There's such stories. People do the social thing, amazing change in the environment. Then the university said that you had to write 2 papers on your sabbatical. And they don't see the social. All universities like the societal engagement and the change, but they also need the papers. So make time for self-reflection and then also figuring out now, what are you? I'm no longer a limnologist. And some people say they're sustainability scientists, dialogue facilitator. I had one student, she came from conservation science and she became a phenomenally good facilitator, a crossover or whatever. So there's a little bit of an identity issue. Play to your strengths in terms of the methods that you use. Very interesting. I've had my natural science training and nowadays I really enjoy narrative data. So the data that comes, the conversations that comes from a dialogue, to work with that data to make something of it is also just a form of data. Nils Selberg is a Swedish girl with a PhD. She was PhD. Transdisciplinarity for her was the way of being. She was so good with the stakeholders, and she wrote a beautiful paper on self-care because all these tensions pulling you apart. So you've got to be. So she started to make time for music and so on, just to make sure that she stays sane and healthy and strong during the course of her PhD, because she didn't only have the academic responsibilities but also the social responsibilities. And then perhaps if you go that route, I don't know, this was just an idea, is that maybe there are times when you're more socially engaged, but then you can maybe go on a little sabbatical and get deep into the scientific reading and writing again and have a little bit of